Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Patriot's History. I'm Larry Schweikart, co-author of Patriot's History of the United States with Michael Allen. And as always, I am reading through the book. This has been a long chapter. It's not inordinately long per se, but we've taken a long time because we had to stop and read the full Articles of Confederation, the full Constitution, the full Bill of Rights, and of course, Mercy Otis Warren's critique of the Constitution. But I'm hoping we'll be able to finish this chapter today. So let's get started. As always, I am reading from the 15th anniversary edition of A Patriot's History of the United States. And if you have an older edition, the headers will be about the same, but the pages may be a tad off. The last header that I started under was Federalism Redefined, but that was a long time ago, about 4 pages earlier. So now I am on page 130, the 15th anniversary edition, last paragraph. Obviously, the anti-federalists opposed many things, but what were they for? By 1787-88, most of them supported a Confederation government revised along the lines of the New Jersey Plan. They maintained that no crisis actually existed, that the nation was fine, that a few adjustments to the articles would cure whatever maladies existed. But the anti-federalists waited too long to agree to any amendment of the articles, and they lost their opportunity. Even some of their leading spokesmen, such as Patrick Henry, unwittingly undercut the sovereign state position when he wrote, quote, "The question turns on that poor little thing, the expression, we the people, instead of the United States of America." With that statement, Henry reinforced Jefferson's assertion in the Declaration that the people of the colonies, not the colonies themselves, separated from England. By invoking the people as opposed to the states, Henry also stated a proposition not far from that of Lincoln in 1861, when he argued that disunion was no more possible than cutting a building in half and thinking it would still keep out the rain. The Federalists saw their opening and brilliantly sidestepped the question of state versus federal sovereignty by arguing that the Constitution made the people sovereign, not the state or the federal government. Far from being the traitors or aristocrats alleged by their opponents, the Federalists showed that they too had inherited the ideology of the Revolution, but only that they took from it different political lessons. Through a series of 85 Federalist papers written as newspaper articles by Hamilton, Madison, and Jay under the pseudonym Publius, they demonstrated the depth and sophistication of their political philosophy. Hamilton, ever the Republican centralist, saw the Constitution as a way to foster a vigorous centralized republic, not a democracy, that would simultaneously promote order and economic liberty in the Lockean tradition. Madison emerged as the most significant of the 3 Federalist Papers authors in one respect. He correctly analyzed the necessity of political parties, factions as he called them, and understood their role. An extensive republic, especially one as large as the United States, would divide society into, quote, greater variety of interests, of pursuits, of passions, which would check each other. Factions then should be encouraged. They provided the competition that tested and refined ideas. More important, they demanded that people inform themselves and take a side, rather than sliding listlessly into murky situations they did not choose to understand out of laziness. Personally, I love Madison's take on this. I don't think parties were anathema to the Constitution. Quite the contrary, I think they were necessary. That the idea was you would have 2 groups that stood radically often against each other. Part of our modern problem is that the 2 groups have almost melded together to where at times you can't tell the difference between the 2 parties. And this is a problem because there's no change, because people, however uncomfortable it may be, can't be pushed into a more radical solution on one side or the other. And after all, it is the radical solutions that fix things, not go along to get along, right? So I think Madison was 100% right on what was happening here. Modern Americans are assaulted by the misguided calls for bipartisanship, a code word for one side ceding its ideas to the party favored by the media. If you ever hear the media championing bipartisanship, you can bet your bottom dollar they don't want Democrats adopting Republican ideas, or better yet, conservative ideas, or even better yet, Trumpian MAGA ideas. By bipartisanship, what the modern media means is that Republicans go along with Democrat policies. In fact, however, Madison detested compromise that involved abandoning principles, and in any event thought that the Republic was best served when factions presented extreme differences to the voters rather than shading their positions toward the middle. The modern moderate voters, so highly praised in the media, would have been anathema to Madison, who wanted people to take sides as a means of creating checks and balances. Nor would Washington, who later called for a common effort, have ever advocated abandoning principle to achieve a temporary expedient. Washington wanted people to work together, but he wanted them to work together as Federalists. No problem with that, but you got to understand what Washington was saying when he said, you know, let's all get together, let's all have a Coke and a smile. Madison's emphasis on factions had a highly practical purpose that, again, reflected his fundamental distrust of human nature. Namely, factions splintered power among groups so that no group dominated others. Like Hamilton then, and later Tocqueville and Thoreau, Madison dreaded, quote, the tyranny of the majority, and feared that mobs could just as easily destroy personal rights as could any monarch. Madison demanded an intellectual contest of ideas and recognized that the Constitution's separation of powers only represented one layer of protections against despotism. The vigorous competition of political parties constituted a much more important safeguard. Hamilton shared Madison's dark view of human nature, but where Madison stressed personal liberties, Hamilton thought more in terms of national interests and the danger posed by the Articles. Portrayed as more of a radical in Madison, one author referred to Hamilton as the Rousseau of the right. The New Yorker has often been viewed as a voice of elitism. In fact, Hamilton sought the alliance of government with elites because he thought they needed to be enlisted in the service of government on behalf of the people, a course they would not take if left to their own devices. To accomplish that, he intended to use the treasury of the new republic and its financial debt structure to encourage the wealthy to align themselves with the interests of the nation. Of course, you got to be careful that their alignment of their interests with that of the nation doesn't mean that they try to make the nation align with their interests. It's tough. Only the wealthy could play that role. Middle-class merchants, farmers, or artisans were too transient, and at any rate didn't have enough surplus to invest in the nation. Permanent stability required near perpetual investment, which in turn required structuring property laws so that the wealthy would not hesitate to place their resources at the disposal of the government. Hamilton also argued that the new government would thrive once the power of the sword, a standing army, was established, opening the door for his detractors to label him both a militarist and a monarchist. Gee, can't talk today. Whereas in reality, he was a pragmatist. Taken together, the ideas of Madison and Hamilton further divided power. And when laid atop the already decentralized and balanced branches, added still more safeguards to the system of multiple levels of voting restrictions, staggered elections, and an informed populace, all of which provided a near impenetrable shield of Republican democracy. Laminating this shield and hardening it still further was the added security of religious conviction and righteousness that would not only keep elected and appointed officials in line on a personal level, but would infuse the voting public with a morality regarding all issues. At least that was the plan as devised by the Federalist founders. State after state cast votes, and the Federalists advanced to a dramatic victory. 5 states, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, and Connecticut, ratified the Constitution within 3 months of first viewing the document. Anti-Federalists claimed voters had not been given enough time to debate and assess the proposal, but Federalists brushed away their objectives and the Constitution sailed through. The process slowed in Massachusetts, New York, North Carolina, New Hampshire, and Virginia. In those states, anti-Federalist majorities attacked the documents, but the Federalists answered them point by point. As the spring and summer of 1788 wore on, the anti-Federalist cause gradually lost support. In some states, tacit and written agreements between the factions traded anti-Federalist support for a written Bill of Rights. New Hampshire's June 21st ratification technically made the Constitution official, although no one was comfortable treating it as such until New York and Virginia had weighed in. Washington helped swing Virginia, stating flatly that, quote, there was no alternative between the adoption of the Constitution and anarchy, and it or disunion is before us to choose from, unquote. Virginia, thanks to Washington's efforts, North Carolina and Rhode Island's opposition, Virginia, thanks to Washington's efforts, ratified on June 25th, and New York followed a month later. Despite North Carolina's and Rhode Island's opposition, the Constitution became the law of the land. The Constitution was, quote, a Trojan horse of radical social economic transformation, placing once and for all the principles espoused by Jefferson in the Declaration into a formal code whose intent was usually, though not always, obvious. All right, the last section here. Yes, the anti-Federalist legacy. Given the benefit of hindsight, it is remarkable that the anti-Federalists fared as well as they did. They lost the battle, but not the war. In 1787-88, the anti-Federalists lacked the economic resources, organizational skill, and political vision to win a national struggle, nor did they have the media of the day. Of 100 revolutionary newspapers, 88 were solidly in the Federalist camp. This proved advantageous when Virginians read false Federalist newspaper reports that New York had ratified on the eve of their own state's narrow vote. Moreover, Franklin J. Hamilton, John Marshall, General Washington himself, the cream of revolutionary society, all backed the Constitution and worked for its ratification. On the other hand, the anti-Federalists were lesser known men who were either aged or less politically active at the time. For example, Sam Adams, George Mason, and Patrick Henry, or young and just getting started in their political careers, such as James Monroe and John Randolph. And ironically, the anti-Federalist love of localism and states' rights sealed their fate. The first national political election demanded a national campaign, organization, and strategy, the kind that typifies our own two-party system in the present day. Anti-Federalists, though, tended to cling to local allegiances. They were fearful of outsiders and ill-equipped to compete on the national stage. To their credit, when they lost, they grudgingly joined the victors in governing the new nation. Yet the anti-Federalist radicalism did not disappear after 1788. Instead, they shifted their field to battle to a strategy of retaining local sovereignty through a philosophy constitutional historians will call strict conservatism, or strict construction. Let me read that sentence again. Instead, they shifted their field of battle to a strategy of retaining local sovereignty through a philosophy constitutional historians call strict construction. This was an application of the narrowest possible interpretation of the Constitution, and the anti-Federalists were aided in arriving at strict construction through their greatest legacy, the Bill of Rights. Following ratification, leaders of both factions agreed to draft amendments to the Constitution, Madison took charge of the project that started him on the path on which he soon transformed from a Federalist to an anti-Federalist leader. Strong precedents existed for a Bill of Rights, the English Magna Carta, Petition of Right, and Bill of Rights enumerated, in various ways, protections against standing armies and confiscation of property, and guaranteed a number of legal rights that jointly are referred to as due process. These precedents had taken the form in most of the revolutionary state constitutions, most famously Virginia's Declaration of Rights, penned by George Mason. Madison studied all of these documents carefully and conferred with anti-Federalist leaders. He then forged 12 proposed constitutional amendments, which Congress sent to the states in 1789. The states ratified 10 of them by 1791. Page 134. The First Amendment combined several rights, speech, press, petition, assembly, and religion into one fundamental law guaranteeing freedom of expression. While obliquely related to religious speech, the clear intent was to protect political speech. This, after all, was what concerned the anti-Federalists about the power of a national government, that it would suppress dissenting views. The amendment strongly implied, however, that even those incapable of oral speech were protected when they financially supported positions through advertising, political tracts, and broadsides, or put simply, money equals speech. However, the founders hardly ignored religion, nor did they embrace separation of church and state, a buzz phrase that never appears in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. Madison had long been a champion of religious liberty. He attended the College of New Jersey, later Princeton, where he studied under the Reverend John Witherspoon. In May 1776, when Virginia lawmakers wrote the state's new constitution, Madison changed George Mason's phrase that all men should enjoy the fullest toleration of religion to all men are entitled to the full and free exercise of religion, our emphasis. Madison thus rejected the notion that the exercise of faith originated with government, while at the same time indicating that he expected a continual and ongoing practice of religious worship. He resisted attempts to insert the name of Jesus Christ into the Virginia Bill for Religious Liberty, not because he was an unbeliever, but because he argued that, quote, better proof of reverence for that holy name would be not to profane it by making it a topic of legislative discussion. Late in his life, Madison wrote, quote, belief in God, all-powerful, wise, and good, is so essential to the moral order of the world and the happiness of man that arguments to enforce it cannot be drawn from too many sources. Even at the time, though, he considered the widespread agreement within the Constitutional Convention a, quote, miracle, and he wrote, quote, it is impossible for the man of pious reflection to perceive in the convention a finger of that Almighty, not to perceive in that convention, the finger of that Almighty hand. Religious and especially Christian influences in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were so predominant that as late as the mid-20th century, the chairman of the Sesquicentennial Commission on the Constitution answered negatively when asked if an atheist could become president. Quote, I maintain that the spirit of the Constitution forbids it. The Constitution prescribes an oath of affirmation, that is, its existence is a covenant with the people, which the president pledges himself to keep with the help of Almighty God. Sorry, this is driving me nuts. There. Modern interpretations of the Constitution that prohibit displays of crosses in the name of religious freedom would rightly have been shouted down by the founders, who intended no such separation. The Second Amendment addressed Whig fears of a professional standing army by guaranteeing the right of citizens to arm themselves and join militias. Over the years, the militia preface has become thoroughly and often deliberately misinterpreted to imply that the framers intended citizens to be armed only in the context of an army under the authority of the state. In fact, militias were the exact opposite of a state-controlled army, and state militias taken together were expected to serve as a counterweight to the federal army. And the further implication was that citizens were to be as well armed as the government itself. Supreme Court decisions in the early 21st century reaffirmed the individual right to possess firearms. The Third Amendment buttressed the right of civilians against the government, military, for forbidding the quartering, housing of professional troops in private homes. The latest decision, the Braun decision out of New York by the U.S. Supreme Court, says that the state cannot impinge or infringe on your liberty to own a firearm and to transport it from one place to another. And it reiterated the Heller decision earlier in the 21st century that reaffirmed that gun ownership was an individual right, not a militia or collective right. Amendments 4 through 8 promise due process via reasonable bail, speedy trials by a jury of peers if requested, and habeas corpus petitions. They forbade self-incrimination and arbitrary search and seizure and proclaimed once again the fundamental nature of property rights. The Ninth Amendment, which has lain dormant for 200 years, states that there might be other rights not listed in the amendments that are nevertheless guaranteed by the Constitution. But the most controversial amendment, the 10th, echoes the second article of the Articles of Confederation in declaring that the states and people retain all rights and powers not granted to the national government by the Constitution. It too has been relatively ignored. States could use, and in recent years have used, nullification of federal laws. Ultimately, the federal government cannot enforce universally unpopular laws or a myriad of laws that are unpopular in hundreds of different locations. These 10 clear statements were intended by the framers as absolute limitations on the power of government, not on the rights of individuals. The great Rush Limbaugh used to say that this is really improperly named. It should not be called the Bill of Rights. It should be called the Bill of Limitations, because it is limitations on what federal and state governments can do, not on the rights that they give you, right? These 10 clear statements are intended by the framers as absolute limitations on the power of government, not on the rights of individuals. In retrospect, it more accurately should be known as the Bill of Limitations on Government to avoid the perception that rights were granted by government in the first place. Two streams of liberty flowed from 1776. First, the Federalists synthesized Whig opposition to centralized military, economic, political, and religious authority into a program built upon separation of power, checks and balances, and staggered terms of office, which simultaneously preserved many state and local prerogatives. Second, the Anti-Federalists completed the process with a Bill of Rights, which further reinforced laws that protected states, localities, and individuals from central government coercion. Both these streams flowed through an American Christianity that emphasized duty, civic morality, skeptical questioning of temporal authority, and economic success. In addition, both streams were fed by Enlightenment can-do doctrines tempered by the realization that men were fallible, leading to an emphasis on competition, political parties, and the marketplace of ideas, which we are rapidly losing today because the left cannot compete in the marketplace of ideas. They lose every time, and hence they must stifle opposing ideas and get rid of the marketplace of ideas. But it was a close-run thing. As Adams recalled, quote, all the great critical questions about men and measures from 1774 to 1778 were decided by the vote of a single state, and that vote was often decided by a single individual. It was by no means inevitable. Nevertheless, the fountain of hope had turned to a river of liberty, nourishing the new nation as it grew and prospered. And that's chapter 4, A Nation of Law. There was one document that I did not read from Patriot's History Reader that was referenced in this chapter. I will get to it next time, and it is the document on George Washington speaking about the dangers of a standing army. Okay, so with that in mind, I will see you back here Wednesday. A few housekeeping notes. We have a new offer coming up on the Wild World of History website. And that offer is that we will have Patriot's History, The Reader, and 48 Liberal Lies for $89, autographed and shipped. And that's pretty good. I got to tell you, postage is really high these days. There's not a lot of profit in that, but it's a great offer. Also, I want you to take a look at the trailer for Patriot's History. We've come to our first milestone. We're writing the screenplay for the pilot episode, which will be 1 to 2 scenes, no more than about 20 minutes. We then have a number of directions to go once we have that pilot and once we have a line budget that will tell us exactly how much money we need to make that pilot. So again, I hope you'll buy me a coffee at Wild World of History. Also, if you're not a VIP member, sign up. $6 a month, folks, and you're getting 5, 6, maybe 7 ongoing video lesson series, including the series on Reagan, the series on Churchill, series on the 1619 project called the 1620 default, why the 1619 project is wrong, many others, plus all of my Wild Wednesday webcasts that I did for almost 2 years, every week on a different history topic. You'll have access to all of those. $6 a month. Sign up for the VIP. It's well worth it. And finally, from from August, I'm in the wrong month here. I got to look at my calendar. From August, let's see, 14th through the 19th, I will be taking a full week off. There will be no episodes that week. I have to get to work on my next book, Patriot's History of Globalism, that is due out in the spring with Steve Bannon and Skyhorse Books. So I've got to get some work done on that. So that's just a heads up. But I will be back here Wednesday, and I'll see you then.